People were dying left, right and centre all round you. So much so that you didn't want to go to any funerals anymore. I remember saying, I'm not going to go to any more funerals unless it's a really close friend.
And lots of gay men reflect now and talk about one of the rules that we had was not to sleep with Americans. One of the rules we had in my community was, well, this is a white man's thing.
I had the startling experience of sometimes patients, people coming to me because their current GPs wouldn't treat them.
Underpinning everything was this assumption that I was going to die. So I didn't plan very far ahead.
Welcome to this special compilation special featuring highlights from series 1 and 2 of HIV The Morning After. It's here to keep the feed interesting before series 3 drops in June. This is the third of 5 such episodes playing out across May. Today's programme features 4 people who were told in different years and in different rooms that their lives would probably be short. 4 people who are still here. "1985 is quite the year here in the UK. The BBC soap opera EastEnders makes its premiere, a show worked on for many years by podcast alumni Jim Voiches. Not long after, the miners' strike comes to an end, and the Dire Straits album Brothers in Arms becomes the first CD to sell over 1 million copies. Today, Gus Cairns is a respected HIV educator and journalist, but our story winds back to those compact disc days of 1985. Gus is fresh from graduating Oxford University, and on a London dance floor, he meets Paul.
Paul was from a very different walk of life from me. He was the son of a pub landlady and an electrician. He was sort of a very sort of looked like a very rough and ready sort of skinhead guy. I met him on the dance floor at Heaven. What a cliche is that? And I was just knocked sideways by him, as much by the power of his personality. He was an extraordinary combination of being confrontative and being warm as a person. He was very difficult. Frankly, he was an alcoholic, as his dad had been. And if AIDS had not caught him, I wonder if we would have stayed together. But he was also, like a lot of alcoholics, sensitive, underneath vulnerable, warm and lovable. And we were together for 4.5 years. We went on a few holidays. He met my family. They were charmed by him because he was on his best behaviour. And then he started getting dark marks on his limbs, chaos lesions. This would be 87. I remember he went on holiday with me to see a friend of ours who'd moved to Spain, and I could see these coming up, and he was getting thinner. December 1985, he's more or less permanently in the HIV ward at St Mary's. He's very sick. He's got all kinds of HIV-related symptoms. He was charmed all the nurses. We had a small, very lively Jack Russell dog called Peanuts, who we were both devoted to. They allowed me to smuggle the dog into the ward through the cargo lift, very, very naughtily. And also then Princess Di came, and Paul was one of the people who was chosen to talk to her. And the video, you'll see this very skinny guy, very chatty, sort of camp cockney, wearing shorts that showed the chaos lesions on his legs. And when I asked him why he did that, he said, I want them to see what it was like. At one point, I said to my friends, listen, I can't stand this anymore. I'm going to have to go to the pub and have a drink. It's the one time in my life I've poured beer down my throat and stayed completely sober. I remember that. Came back. He was living in out of consciousness, and he said to me, I thought you'd disappeared. I thought I'd given you up. No, I said, I'm still here. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he wakes me up. I was trying to struggle out of bed. I said, what are you doing? He said, I want to go to the loo. His mum tried to help him go to the loo, and he couldn't do it. And then he tried again. And I said, look, Brenda, that was her name. Don't help him. He needs to do this by himself. So he struggled at the loo, barely able to walk, had a pee. I said, did you manage to have a pee? He said, yes, fell back on the bed. That was his last moment of consciousness. About 5 o'clock in the morning, he wakes me up again, making some awful, terrible noise, animal-like kind of noise, like terror and screeching. And I asked the nurse who was there, is this it? Is he dying? She said, no, he's not. He's having a dream. And I remember thinking, he's never going to wake up and be able to tell me what that dream was like. And about midday on January the 5th, I suddenly noticed he wasn't breathing anymore, and that was Paul's death. As soon as the doctor came along and certified him, I remember insisting on going down to Hackney Town Hall and having his death registered, and absolutely insisting that AIDS was recorded on his death certificate, because I know he would want it to be. He taught me the power of defiance and the power of absolutely standing up for yourself. He was in many ways a vulnerable, traumatized, difficult person. He'd had a bad, difficult childhood. He had a big drink problem. I don't know if we'd have stayed together, but I think we'd always have been friends even if we hadn't. But he had enormous self-respect. And I learnt lessons from him that you can only learn from somebody you love.
Just a year later from Gus's story, we join Mark Thompson in South London's iconic Brixton. He's recently out, and at 17 years old, he tests positive. What little queer sex education there is appears in nightclubs that are predominantly marketed at white gay men.
In the early 80s, yes, the gay scene was based predominantly in central London, mainly in West London, as you said, in Earls Court, and partly in Soho then. But for many black queer people and queer people of colour, those places were not particularly welcoming to us as black queer people, either because of racist door policies. You know, you had to kind of prove that you were gay, and that put lots of people off, or you'd get into the spaces and you had to deal with racist punters. You know, let's not live in this world where there was this gay utopia. So for many of us, going into those spaces were not comfortable and they weren't safe. If I looked at any news coverage, and there was news coverage, it was white gay men. They were older than me. They were in the United States. And lots of gay men reflect now and talk about one of the rules that we had was not to sleep with Americans. Well, one of the rules we had in my community was, well, this is a white man's thing. When I started to access services, I would go and I would be the only black gay man there. I'd be the only person who was young. I would be the only person who, frequently the only person in those spaces who hadn't had any form of illness. But then even when I wasn't in those spaces and I looked around my friendship group, nobody I knew was positive. Everybody, or they certainly didn't know or tell me. So that felt like a huge weight and a huge burden, because there was nobody I could look at and just say, okay, you're going to be okay, or are you as scared as I am? And how do your family feel about it? And how are you going to tell your boyfriends in the future? And I knew that all of this intersected with my blackness and my queerness, and they were not inseparable. So if I'd looked out on the world and saw only white gay men like getting this thing, was I going to be the only black man that had it? And I became known in the small black gay community as Mark with the virus.
Did you find in this period an awareness of a growing HIV community, and was it providing support to you?
I mean, I'd become aware of I was part of the HIV community before that, just by going to places like the Landmark, and also because by this time I'd set up the first Black gay men's group for positive Black gay men at the Lighthouse. And I remember there were only 4 of us that turned up on the Sunday afternoon, but it was probably one of the most important days of my life. So I started to slowly become more aware of the community. I wasn't necessarily political small p at the time, but my Black gay community was expanding. There were more and more men who were stepping up to the bat.
Why was that afternoon with 4 of you in the room so important?
Being in community with those guys who came from a similar background for me, either from the Caribbean or from the African continent. We had similar family experiences. We were all worried about our HIV in a very unique way, and that's not to say it was lesser or more than anybody else's experience, but it was ours because it was rooted in our Black British experience of feeling isolated for all these years, and then suddenly going, oh my God, I'm not alone.
GP Peter Willis appeared in the previous episode, but now we join him earlier in his timeline as he experiences HIV on both sides of the consulting table.
Being a GP in those very first days, I had the startling experience of sometimes people coming to me because their current GPs wouldn't treat them. And in 1 or 2 cases, we got the record envelopes they would sometimes reach me with HIV positive written in red on the outside of the packet. And this, of course, was very unethical. It was, apart from anything else, it told everybody who handled the records without even opening it that the patient had HIV and was probably gay.
What is it like for you from a professional perspective to be presented with a condition of which really you can do nothing? Or very little?
A big change from GU medicine when I started. One of the things I used to say about it was that it was a wonderful speciality because people would come in enormous distress, and you could make everybody better. And then HIV came along, where clearly, initially, you really couldn't do anything. My partner, Malcolm, died of AIDS after 16 years together. And to me, it was quite clear that he had AIDS. He didn't want to be tested. And in the early days, there was, as I've said, no point. But he was extremely busy in the theatre world and entirely engrossed in it. And he just didn't seem to want to be involved in that self-awareness of his illness. He wanted to get on with life. A lovely thing was that my youngest brother and his then, of course, much younger children were going on holiday to the mainland of Europe. And instead of leaving early in the morning, on the night when ultimately Malcolm died, they left early from Northampton to come down to London and spend the night with me. And I remember standing by the bedside for some time in silence, and then turning and realizing that niece and 2 nephews were standing there silently beside me. They had to leave after early in the morning to go down to Dover to get their ferry, but I stayed on and ultimately was lying in bed with Malcolm, and he was having terrible pain from pleurisy. I don't know whether he was conscious enough to hear me, but ultimately, and I must say this is difficult to do. And I sympathize and feel very much for others who have done it. But to say quietly in his ear, it's all right, love, you can go. I'll be all right without you. And very soon he stopped trying to breathe and died. And we had a wonderful service with a standing room only, and his medical team and the nurses from the Middlesex were there, students from the Guildhall, his parents, my mother, and I walked in and sat down in the front, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to say anything. But then I heard Malcolm's voice, as it were, calling from on high somewhere, saying, it's absolutely unforgivable to let personal emotions interfere with a performance. And I thought, right. And I got up and gave my 20-minute little talk. And as we all walked out with the bell of St. Botolph tolling, which I hadn't expected, and the organist managing on the oldest organ in London to play There'll Be a Place for Us, a Time and Place for Us, and Take My Hand and I'll Lead You There. The organist heroically managing to play this. And as I walked past the church warden, she said, I've never heard anything so wonderful about love. And I'm very proud of that.
It's 1993, and the first shoots of what would become Brexit have appeared, when the anti-EU Independence Party comes into being. And if that wasn't enough, an avalanche of Diamante is thrown at the people of Britain when the channel QVC launches. Meanwhile, Martin Fennerty, a handsome 23-year-old with his life in front of him, tests positive. And we are still years before effective combination therapy.
My life was sort of frozen in a way, or I was frozen from that point with just in terms of how I guess thought about myself and thought about life. And underpinning everything was this assumption that I was going to die. So I didn't plan very far ahead. I didn't have any aspirations beyond that, but also I was I found myself really fearful of doing anything that was sort of too far in the future or too ambitious. I'd very much suffered with my mental health, and I think I'd had quite strong thoughts of suicide, and there'd never been any immediate danger of me acting on those thoughts, but I held on to that idea of suicide as a safety net, as if anything gets too difficult, if things get too complicated and too difficult, then at least I can end my own life. That's something that I can do. I started combination therapy in 1997, and combination therapy really was transformative. Within 6 months, my viral load, so the amount of virus that they were able to test for in my blood, was what they call undetectable. So I wasn't virus free, but it was at such a level that they weren't able to detect it. That led to a sort of transformation in my health. So it was then that I actually realised the full extent of how ill I'd been up till then. My energy levels really rebounded. My body physically rebounded. So I started to become ill with a variety of different things. And it was because my immune system had been rebooted. And I'd lost immunity to some things because my immune system had been under attack. So it was like I was meeting some of these bugs and some of these things for the first time, like I was a child. And so I was responding to them physically in the same way. My life is really very good. That realization that I was waiting to die was a realization that I had to live and that I had to take control of, and that I wanted to take control of my life and to make choices, to live and to learn how to live. And I think that's something that I have done over the last 20 years. I'm as healthy as I can be for a 55-year-old man. I have health problems, but nothing that no other 55-year-old man could not expect to have. I'm physically very nimble. I run, I go to the gym, and I work full time in very sort of demanding but fulfilling career, and I'm in a relationship. I'm married. I'm married to somebody who is HIV negative. We have a nice little home here in Liverpool, and life has worked out really well for me.
Full conversations with Gus Cairns, Mark Thompson, Peter Willis and Martin Fennerty are available now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube and wherever you normally listen to podcasts. Thank you to Pauline Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com for his wonderful theme tune, and to Murray Lang for his continued support. Please rate and review the show as it helps to spread the word. Series 3 of HIV The Morning After begins in June. I've been Dan Hall.